Well, a very happy new year to you, first of all. Welcome to our special programme on Brexit. This is the fateful hour when the UK leaves the EU. Preparations have been ongoing, of course, either side of the English Channel. We can tell you Dover, the port, the main port from the UK to Europe, i.e. France, is running smoothly at this hour, according to our reporter at the scene. We'll join her very shortly. In fact, let's show you the team we have on the ground to bring you this momentous occasion when Brexit actually happens. Luke Brown is in Calais, Dave Keating in Brussels, Benedict Pavio in London, and there's Catherine Norris-Trent there in Dover. In the studio, we have our Europe editor, Catherine Nicholson as well, who's been following this from start to finish. Catherine, great to see you. So the trade deal agreed last week, approved by the British Parliament in record time, is providing a framework going forward. Whether you're happy with it or not, it's there. So over 4 years after the referendum, the Brits voted by roughly 52 to 48 to leave the EU, the actual Brexit is now happening. Let's go to Benedict Pavio first in London to get some reaction from there. Benedict, good evening to you. The UK's era in the EU is now ending. Boris Johnson is hailing this as the UK's freedom moment. Tell us more.
Yes, so 4.5 years after the Brexit referendum and 3 prime ministers later, we have the end of the transition period. The UK officially left on the 31st of January 2020. And now this new era begins, that moment of freedom in the British Prime Minister's New Year's Eve message. He says we have that freedom in our hands. It's up to us to make the most of it. And he says this is an amazing moment for the United Kingdom. Interestingly, he also invites all 4 nations that make up the UK, so England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, to really pool together their values and show what they're best at. So he's very ambitious for the United Kingdom and he wants it to lead the world in sciences, biosciences, also artificial intelligence. He reminds the nation that it will lead the G7 in 2021, that it will have that delayed COP26 climate change conference that will take place in Glasgow. And of course, mixed feelings here in the United Kingdom. Vindication, success for the Brexiteers who voted 52% to 48% back in July 2016 for Brexit. But of course, great sadness for those British citizens who regret the end of that formal and really intimate relationship with the 27 other member states. So no party here. We're in confinement, the highest alert certainly in the British capital and in 80% of England, and indeed across really the United Kingdom there are severe restrictions. So a very special, definitely historic moment in the life of the United Kingdom.
And there you are, on the banks of the Thames, Big Ben in the background, illuminated, telling us all about it. Tell us more of the mood where you are in London.
Well, there are some people who are behind our cameras walking around, some joggers, some walkers, mostly British, but also foreign, some EU citizens, some Brexiteers, some British people who are regretting the departure from the EU. But as I said, no party atmosphere. Normally, both this side and the other side of the Thames here would be thronging with people, thousands and thousands of people coming to see the fireworks here. But the party was cancelled and the fireworks were cancelled some time ago, about 6 months ago, by the Mayor of London because of the pandemic. So that's the reality, as there is the hope also pointed out in the New Year's Eve message by Boris Johnson of the vaccine that is held out. Now we have 2. We have the Pfizer-BioNTech that's been rolled out in this massive vaccination programme, and that light at the end of the tunnel. And next Monday, the Oxford-AstraZeneca. But a Prime Minister who regrets very much having curtailed the liberties repeatedly of citizens. He regrets that. One of the big question marks here is, as we launch into 2021, is actually, has this Brexit process very much endangered the unity of the United Kingdom? As we see a very likely, not just elections in Scotland next year, in the coming months, but also likelihood of a second referendum, independence referendum, whether sanctioned by the British government or not, and whether that really will be the battle of independence of Scotland. So that's a very pressing question I haven't evoked yet, but one that deserves to be really evoked in this historic moment as this new chapter and this new dawn beckons for the United Kingdom out of the EU.
Indeed, Benedict, as you were covering the vote as it happened last week, as things, and then of course things going through the Parliament yesterday, day before yesterday, was the Labour Party backed?
Yesterday.
Yes, indeed. I'm trying to get my clock sorted out there. The Labour Party decided to back.
Sure.
They were kind of between a rock and a hard place. I think they had to back the actual deal or be seen as the party of no deal, which of course would have been kind of ironic. But other parties, and I'm thinking of the SNP, I'm thinking of Plaid Cymru, I'm thinking of the Northern Irish parties, they abstained, didn't they? They didn't vote for it at all. Again, sort of saying, look, we don't believe in this.
Yes, you're quite right to underline that. That is indeed the case. So we've had these. Let's remember, David Cameron called that referendum because he promised that there would be one if he won that 2015 election. He did marginally, so he kept his promise. But he resigned, although he said he wouldn't. Then we got Theresa May, and then we got all these incredible votes where sometimes she lost them by 200 votes in Parliament. We changed Speaker in Parliament. All this, it went to the Supreme Court. I mean, it was quite extraordinary, this tension. But you're so right to underline the fact that, ironically, we then got the Labour Party supporting this deal. Why? Because although it was described by Keir Starmer, its leader, as a thin deal, it was seen as it would be catastrophic to have a no deal. But those other parties, as you said, from Wales, Plaid Cymru, the Scottish National Party, the Liberal Democrats, they and the Northern Ireland parties all voted against it because they considered that this is just a very bad deal and this is they wanted to register that. So it is quite an extraordinary situation where we have a Conservative Party that is united voting for this, but where we have potentially, and that will play out in the coming months, a division, a deep division within the Labour Party, and quite a lot of MPs who are very unhappy that they were being whipped, in other words, instructed to vote for this deal.
Indeed, whipped does conjure up a certain image about how people have been forced into certain categories in this entire story. Benedict, thank you very much indeed for your analysis. As ever, Benedict Pavio, our correspondent there in London, giving us a real sense of what people in the capital think politically, socially, and how things are there. Let's now move to the sharp end in many ways of what Brexit might mean. The port of Dover, of course, main access point from the UK into France and into the EU, into Europe and beyond. Catherine Norris-Trent is our reporter there who's been observing matters for us throughout the day, and she joins us now live. Catherine, hello to you. Tell us the mood where you are.
Well, Mark, it's very subdued so far in Dover tonight. It's not quite the new year yet, of course, still just after 11 p.m. here in the UK, but it's very much the start of a new era here for the UK, outside now of the EU, outside of that transition period which we've lived through since the end of January 2020. But you'd be hard pushed to tell at this stage because Dover, like much of England, is in the very strictest level of coronavirus shutdown. So there are very few people out on the streets. There are a few solitary fireworks going off, a few people we've seen out walking their dogs along the seafront here, along the English Channel. But it's hard to tell. It's not really a party atmosphere, as you might expect in normal towns, in a town which voted by more than 62% in that 2016 referendum to leave the EU. Now, I was out and about earlier speaking to people in the daytime, and you know, there was a real mix of opinions. It just shows how divisive the issue of Brexit still is, even in a place like Dover. A real mix between people who said it was going to be a great day for the UK to be finally free of the EU, and others who said they thought it was a terrible mistake. But you know, a real consensus now that there's no real turning back and that people will have to go forward. People here are a little apprehensive, I have to say, about the future, bracing for perhaps more chaos in the days to come, although at the moment, things are very quiet here in the port of Dover.
Now, you mentioned that word chaos, which makes me think immediately of the thousands of lorry drivers who were stuck on the motorway, sent to an airport as a makeshift car park, an airstrip nearby. They've been coming through Dover. What's the latest with those drivers?
OK, so those thousands of lorry drivers have now all been let through the British border and been allowed to cross back into France, and then some of them onwards from there. So that immediate crisis has died down, Mark. Those people were given coronavirus tests, as all the lorry drivers, as anyone coming from the UK into France now has to do with this new variant of coronavirus that has been detected first in the UK. So the big queues of lorries backing up on the motorways near Dover have disappeared for now. There are questions about whether they're going to come back now, going forward into January, after the 1st of January bank holiday and after the weekend. Then into the early days of January, the early weeks, are there going to be more queues in Dover? Because a lot of people are worried that the businesses don't have their paperwork fully sorted now for this non-seamless trade with Europe. They're going to have to do quite a lot of it. So we're talking health and safety certificates, customs declaration. There's going to be some health checks for some products coming in. So it's a lot of organisation, and some business leaders say, especially smaller firms, well, just probably really aren't ready as things stand. And they say that even any small delays that could quickly cause a backlog, and we could once again see those lorries parked along the M20.
Catherine Norris-Trent in Dover, Britain's main port and access towards France and the EU and Europe and beyond. Thank you very much indeed, Catherine, there in Dover. So we've heard from London, we've heard from Dover. Let's now move into the EU and go to Brussels. Centre of it all, I suppose. Dave Keaton's our correspondent there. Dave, a very good evening to you. We've heard what Benedict and Catherine had to say about, the view in the UK, about the background there, about what's happened today and how people are feeling. Tell us what it is where you are, what's happening there.
Well, the mood here is bittersweet, I would say. That's the word everyone's using to describe it, because people are feeling relieved that this saga of the negotiations is over. People were obviously quite nervous about the prospect of a no-deal Brexit, because that would have meant some severe economic pain on this side of the channel as well. But of course, people are also upset to see the UK go, for the most part. But I think there's real relief. There's relief that a deal was able to be struck. And in the end, I think particularly over the past week, as people have had time to digest the Brexit deal text, there is a mood here in Brussels that people are happy with this text, that this is a good deal for the EU. After all, the EU was able to secure tariff-free access to UK goods, that's the key word there, goods, while also preserving the integrity of the single market, while making sure that the UK can't deviate from EU standards and norms in order to unfairly compete with the EU. Otherwise, the EU can retaliate with tariffs. It was something that the UK was resisting for a long time, and in the end, finally, Boris Johnson accepted. And people here are pretty confident with the mechanism that's been put in place there. And they do think that the fact that the goods have been secured, and the reason why I emphasize that word goods is because that was the main important thing for the EU, because that's what they export to the UK. What does the UK export to the EU? Services, and services are not covered by this Brexit deal. So I think there is a feeling here right now, and we'll see if this pans out and if it's indeed the case, but there is a feeling that this is a pretty good deal for the EU and maybe less so for the UK, and people are pretty pleased with the tactics used by Michel Barnier, the EU's chief Brexit negotiator. They're pretty happy with what they've ended up with here.
So Boris Johnson has hailed this as an excellent deal. Tell us more about how the EU sees it and why perhaps Boris Johnson isn't quite hitting the mark with that remark.
Well, yeah, I mean, we saw EU member states pass this without any objection. Now, of course, that approval is provisional. It's lasting. The last date I heard was February 28th, although they may have delayed that by a couple weeks. The European Parliament still has to weigh in on this, and that'll be a key question. It is inconceivable, frankly, that the European Parliament would reject this in the next 3 months unless something extraordinary happens. That could either be that they see something in the text that they say, oh, wait, actually, this isn't such a good deal for the EU. Right now, MEPs I'm hearing from all say, no, we think this is a pretty good deal. But it's possible they could discover something in the next 2 months and say, we need this fixed or else we're not approving this. And then the deal is canceled. It's kind of another Brexit deadline that we may be running into in March. That's when the European Parliament is planning to vote on this. The other scenario in which the European Parliament could cancel this deal is if Boris Johnson comes out and says something publicly that makes it look like he's not intending on living up to his end of this deal. Of course, he famously threatened that for the withdrawal treaty. That could be another thing that makes the European Parliament reject this. But the deal as it stands, what they've read in the text, they are happy with it on the EU side. They do feel this is a good deal for the EU. It's checked all of the main boxes that the EU wanted. The EU is still going to have access to UK fishing waters for some time, and they think it won't just be the 6 years that they have agreed, the 5 years that they have agreed. They think it will be beyond that because the EU is making access to the EU's energy market a requirement for having access. They're saying they need access to the fish in order for the UK to have access to the EU's energy market. So they think that's definitely going to be extended beyond 6 years. They're pretty happy with it, unless they discover something in that 1,200-page text, which they're still going over, MEPs, in the next 2 months.
So is the biggest threat then, from what you're saying, I think this is what I'm picking up on, that Boris Johnson might go rogue? Is that the biggest threat to this whole thing?
Yeah, I think it is. I think that's what might throw a wrench into the curve, or whatever the expression is,
Spatter into the works.
In the next 2 months, where MEPs, against expectations, might cancel the deal. A spanner into the works. That's what I was mixing up my American and British
Hey, no problem,
expressions.
Dave. No problem. You're the man.
That's what could really go wrong here, I think, if Boris Johnson said something.
Thank you very much indeed. Dave Keating there in Brussels with the analysis. And believe me, that is a word that we value a lot here on this programme. So the UK has left the EU after 48 years. The transition period is over. Let's bring in John Bartlett, Professor of Government at the University of Essex, for further analysis of this situation. John, good evening to you. What are your thoughts? Boris Johnson talks of British people taking control in this modern interconnected world. Is it as simple as that, or is that just words? Tell me what you think.
Well, Boris Johnson and the people around him certainly believe that Britain is taking back control. They've campaigned on this in 2016 for a long time. Many of the people have been campaigning for withdrawal from the European Union for 30 years. And they're so delighted to have achieved it that I think that they're not really thinking through the consequences of withdrawal from the European Union. For many people in the United Kingdom, withdrawal from the European Union, far from re-establishing our sovereignty, will actually reduce our ability to solve many of the problems that we have, which we share with our European colleagues. So there are people in the UK who are delighted about what has just happened, and there's an equally large group of people who are bitterly disappointed. And in between, most of the electorate, most of the voters are thinking about other things at the moment, COVID in particular, but they're also wondering and not sure about the implications of withdrawal from the single market for their own prosperity. So in future years, I think there's a lot that can change in terms of public opinion.
I'm also wondering about the trade deal and about what people who voted for Brexit in 2016, what they think about it, because many are saying this isn't what they voted for. What can you add to that?
Well, people voted for different things in 2016. There has always been a sizable portion of the British electorate who've never reconciled to Britain's membership of the European Union. And they based their objectives basically on the proposition that Britain should be control its own laws and so on. Then there were other people who, over time, just became frustrated with the way the European Union was developing and saw it as very bureaucratic and slow to reform. And then finally, there are a large group of people, particularly former Labour voters, who moved to support withdrawal from the European Union, primarily because it offered a way of controlling immigration, which they thought was getting out of control. So there are many reasons why we've arrived at the point where we are. I just add as a caveat that virtually every opinion poll that's been taken since 2016 has indicated that there is a majority for remaining within the EU in the UK. In some way, the Leave campaign got very lucky in the timing of the referendum, because in most days they would have narrowly lost a referendum campaign, fought any other day.
Indeed, there are many loose ends in this story, aren't there? And I'm wondering whether the Brexit story is over. Can I ask you how you feel it might look in 10 years' time, 20 years' time?
Well, it's impossible to know. I mean, one question is how the British economy develops compared to the European economy. That's something that we don't know. Many the strong Eurosceptics who've led the campaign to withdraw from the EU believe that the UK, once it's left the EU, will be able to get rid of the regulations that have held back the British economy. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that as we withdraw from the EU and the single market, we start to realise that what we've lost. As the pop song goes, you don't know what you've lost till it's gone.
Joni Mitchell, I like it.
People will start to find that in very, very small ways, the European Union did rather more for them than they actually understood. During the 2016 campaign, there was a lot of incomprehension about what was at stake. And I think it may be over the next few years that we start to learn exactly what the European Union was at last, once we're finally not members.
Indeed. That line from Joni Mitchell's song is an absolute corker to sum up what's happening, I suppose. Might have thrown the Rolling Stones. You can't always get what you want. But then again... John, thank you very much indeed for your time, sir. Great to have your analysis joining us there from Colchester in Essex. John Bartlett, Professor of Government at the University of Essex there. John, thanks again. Let's now turn to our Europe editor, Catherine Nicholson, who's been, along with me, listening to all that analysis coming through and some lively reaction and a real sense of what's going on, which is great to have from all around. And, of course, it will continue beyond this. Catherine, Boris Johnson, we've spoken about this before, you and I, talking about people taking control, about... putting things back together, about sort of Britain getting hold of its money, its fishing, all these aspects. And is this the excellent deal that he says it is, do you think? Or is this sort of Johnsonian exaggeration or positive spin? Let's put it that way.
He's a very theatrical person, isn't he? I think that's something that we can definitely say. Use of Latin expressions in his speeches, that kind of thing. Well, Boris Johnson is still very much selling this deal as a really great deal for the UK. And, let's have a look at what's in the deal. For example, Boris Johnson's promised that the UK would retain tariff and quota-free access to the EU single market for trade in goods. That is one of the central planks of this 1,200-page deal that we've been talking about. However, as Dave Keating so rightly mentioned just before, 80% of the British economy is based on services, mostly financial services. We all know about the City of London, of course, but all kinds of other services as well that are exported, so to speak, into the European Union. Now, the details on services are yet to be hammered out. So there's a big question mark there. Over 80% of the British economy. Of course, not all services are acting in the single market, but, it's proportionately a huge amount. Boris Johnson, though, as I said, he's still very much selling this as being a great deal for the UK. He was speaking to a British broadcaster earlier on. He said that, the critics were saying that you can't have your cake and eat it. But he said this hasn't turned out to be true. And he said, I want you to see that this is a cakeist treaty. So that doesn't necessarily really mean anything, but colourful words and his way of saying, I really believe in this and I'm going to keep selling this is a really great deal.
Indeed, a cakeist treaty, I suppose, which that comes in many layers then, doesn't it? And there might be a cherry on the top and that cherry might belong to him or one of his supporters, so you can politically look at that how you wish.
We can get the cherry picking if you like.
Indeed. But what will the cream of it be? Let's park that let's park that image to one side. There will be large scale changes, obviously, in terms of how business functions, and there will be winners and losers. Many people, though, are just kind of seeing negatives at the moment about delays and paperwork.
Well, there is going to be a lot of paperwork. It's just a fact. The EU single market is based on the free movement of people, goods, services and capital, money, around the EU single market. The UK made an active choice to leave the single market with Brexit, and therefore, these non-tariff barriers come into play. So this means if you are taking a consignment of goods from the UK to Belgium, Bulgaria, Romania, wherever you like, there is paperwork for you as the exporter. There's also paperwork for the person who's receiving those goods at the other end. And now this does raise questions for exporters from the UK. It's not just a case of, paperwork, that's a bit boring. it takes time to fill in paperwork. You have to have people to do it. The person at the other end has to be prepared to do it. It adds time, it adds costs, and there are predictions from analysts that there are certain industries in the UK that possibly will not survive this addition of these non-tariff barriers to trade.
Indeed, so there could be genuine costs to this taking back of control,
Absolutely.
as the Brexit camp would have put it. Catherine, thank you very much indeed. Catherine Nicholson, our Europe editor, with that analysis. Britain then leaves the EU after 48 years. Brexit has happened, and our analysis continues. Stay with us here on France 24.
France 24. Every art form.
Liberté, égalité, actualité. Kapisa is a province in eastern Afghanistan. Between 2008 and 2012, France sent hundreds of soldiers there to help the Afghan army fight the Taliban. More than 50 of them lost their lives. France also financed hospitals, schools and clinics. But what's it like in Kapisa now, 8 years after the French left? Our reporters have been there to talk to people about their daily struggles and the ever-present threat from the Taliban. Don't miss Kapisa Revisited on France 24 and France24.com. Liberté, égalité, actualité.
In Brazil, more than half the population is black, yet the country is still plagued by deep-seated racism. Children, adults are murdered because of the color of their skin, and segregation remains a daily reality. The fight against racism in Brazil is gaining momentum. Our team of journalists followed Vidas Negras Importam, a Black Lives Matter movement. From Rio to Sao Paulo, in the shadow of Minneapolis, we delve into the heart of Brazil's fight against racial prejudice.
Reporters presented by Mark Owen on France 24 and France24.com.
In 1953, at the height of the Korean War, millions of soldiers and civilians died. Few have since been identified. For the victims' families, the fight goes on, as the remains of their forebears have yet to be found. Many bodies are in the demilitarized zone that has separated the two Koreas since the end of the war. Today, our reporters are there to witness an event that's been 70 years in coming. Following a recent agreement between the two Koreas, the search has been renewed. The Korean Peninsula has decided to unearth its past, the memories of war.
Revisited, presented by Stuart Norval on France 24 and France24.com.
Welcome to our special edition looking at, yes, Brexit. The UK finally leaves the EU. Half an hour ago it happened. Now it's the beginning of a different kind of relationship. 48 years of close working as part of that European unit is now over. That's the scene in London where Big Ben is, shrouded still in scaffolding. And I suppose that's a kind of an image that represents the reconstruction that's going on across the EU now in terms of rebuilding relationships and structures and how to move forward into the brave new future outside of the EU. Some, of course, see it as an exciting time. Others are seeing it with an element of regret. And that all depends on how you voted on that fateful day back in 2016. It was a close-run thing. But then again, it's been a very, very eventful thing. And now this fateful moment with the UK after 48 years out of the European Union. We have correspondents across this whole story to bring you the images from where they are in particular. And we'll be going to them throughout this next half hour of analysis and thought about the Brexit process. Let's go first to London, where that big clock is right now, and Benedict Pavio, who is situated on the other side of the Thames from Big Ben. Benedict, our London correspondent, who's followed this story from start to finish and brought us every twist and turn along the way. Benedict, good evening to you. Are you feeling any different now you're out of the EU?
Well, perhaps, Mark, it's time to say I'm half French, half British, and this is a very bitter, sweet, somewhat sad and not easy moment, and those feelings will be shared by people who are not Anglo-French. They may be just British, perhaps married or living with an EU citizen in this country. There are 3.5 million of those, some who have applied. Let's start talking about that. They have to apply for a pre-settled status or settled status to remain legal. They've got until the summer to do that here. Some people will be very, very happy. And of course, that is definitely the case of the British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. Let's remember that he is one of the principal architects of the successful Brexit campaign. Let's also remember that the polls did not predict a win for Brexit. They predicted that the British people would say no. In the event, it was 52% who voted for that. And yes, we have been covering that ever since the British Prime Minister, remember him? David Cameron, having won the 2015 election, had made a promise in that campaign that he would call a referendum. He kept that promise. He didn't keep the promise to stay in office in case it was in favour of Brexit. Here we are 4.5 years later and 2 prime ministers later, since we also had Theresa May, who had a very, very difficult time. You'll remember all those historic votes that came and went. And then Boris Johnson is that Prime Minister who called an early general election, which has changed everything, because that 80-seat majority enabled him, that was a year ago, has enabled him in the last 24 hours to push through this UK-EU deal, agreed only on Christmas Eve, remember, and thanks to the Labour Party supporting it, a Labour Party that itself is divided because it was basically against mostly Brexit. And then we have the smaller parties whose vote did not register, which was the Welsh Party, Plaid Cymru, the Scottish National Party, unsurprisingly, who opposed this, and the Liberal Democrats and all the Northern Ireland parties. So an extraordinary moment in the history of this country as it changes its relationship with the EU. An awful lot more paperwork, customs inspections. If you've got pets, you're going to have to check what the regulation is. Health insurance, all kinds of things that are going to change. A lot of uncertainty because the deal was struck so late. So despite the government saying we as a country are ready, the customs checks are ready, there is going to be a phasing in of that process, which will be interesting to watch. I understand that there won't be too much traffic as far as lorries are concerned in Calais, Dover, because of course there is a fear that there could be some disruption, a disruption possibly that will be short-lived. That is the hope of the British government. But some people very sad here, and certainly no party atmosphere. We're in the midst of the pandemic, 55,000 or more infections a day. I have seen constant ambulances stream past us as we're near St Thomas's Hospital, where indeed the British Prime Minister was in the intensive care unit some months ago when he got COVID-19. So a somewhat sombre mood for some. Some will be celebrating, others will be regretting, pausing, and there is some Brexit fatigue as people struggle for their livelihoods, their businesses, to pay their bills, wonder if they have got a business, and whether their children can go back to school as planned, despite this COVID pandemic. 72,500 lives lost here in the United Kingdom so far, but the hope, as in this New Year message held out by the British Prime Minister, of the rollout of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, and as of Monday next week, the Oxford AstraZeneca one.
Indeed, let's hope that rollout of the vaccine can have the desired effect and start to reverse the trends in the UK, which are disturbing. Benedict, do take care of yourself. Thank you very much for your analysis. Thanks for joining us. Benedict Pavio, our correspondent there on the banks of the River Thames.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too, Benedict, and let's hope it's a good one, eh? Better than the last one that's gone anyway. Let's hope we're out of all the trouble very soon.
All our viewers. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much, Benedict Pavio there in London. Let's bring in Catherine Nicholson, our Europe editor, who's been listening to everything that we've been saying, of course. And Catherine, Benedict's covered it from start to finish, as have you. You've been involved in every twist and turn, often from Brussels, hearing it from the different side of things. You've been talking to us about the effect on macroeconomics and big business and people who have those kind of things. Let's talk about sort of the more micro things, the everyday little things that we take for granted. Like, for instance, you get a parcel from your family. That changes. I'm going to pack, say, me and my other half are going to get in the car, take our dog to the UK for a little visit. That becomes more complicated. Pet passports, all these little things that never get spoken about, but for ordinary people, it's going to change a lot of things. So I get my dog into the car, we go to Calais. What happens? Do we know? We don't know, do we yet?
Such a lovely dog she is as well.
Thank
Betty
you.
the Beagle, I have to say for our viewers.
She's famous
around? At France 24. Well, yes, currently, or up until 35 minutes ago, British people who wanted to bring a cat, a dog or a ferret, not any animal, not your peacocks and Komodo dragons, cats, dogs and ferrets.
That's Betty.
There's Betty. Could have one of these EU pet passports, which I imagine Betty has as well.
She has a passport. It's been well stamped.
And it's valid for the entire life of that pet. So they just get it once and then off they go.
And it's been incredibly straightforward. It's like sort of get her wormed by the vet 48 hours before.
Yeah, rabies check, that
in
sort
she
of
goes.
thing.
It's all done, stamped, and away you go. Simple.
Yeah, well, it is going to be more complicated for British people who want to travel with their pets into the EU from now on. They're leaving the pet passport scheme. They're going to replace that with a new animal health certificate, an AHC. People will need to get that from a vet. There's obviously some costs involved there of going to see your vet. And it's only valid for 4 months after issue. So EU pet passport entire life, this just 4 months. So you have to renew it probably every year if you take an annual holiday into the EU. For human travellers as well, there are going to be more things to think about. So, Brits have been used to this totally free movement around the entire European Union for all these decades, as long as they had a valid passport, of course. As of today, a British tourist can come into the EU just with their passport, but only for 90 days in total in any 180-day period. So people are going to be have to doing a little bit of maths if they're used to doing quite a few mini breaks here and there. And for EU citizens, there'll be complications as well. They can stay in the UK for up to 6 months without a visa. So everyone's got to get used to all these new rules, and things will get a little more complicated as of 2022. For British people coming into the EU, they have to pay for something, a visa waiver scheme. It'll cost just a few euros. It'll be valid for 3 years. But again, it's just another bit of paperwork, another bit of bureaucracy. And as many people have pointed out, one of the ironies is that some of the Brexit promises were about cutting red tape and bureaucracy, blamed on Brussels. We are seeing that Brexit does involve quite a lot of paperwork and red tape and bureaucracy.
Indeed. Catherine, thank you very much indeed. Catherine Nicholson, our Europe editor. Thank you. Let's get another aspect of what's happening. Of course, we've heard from the UK side of things. Let's go now to the chief French starting point when you're heading towards the UK. Calais, Luke Brown is our reporter there, right at the very north of France on that map. There he is, Calais. Luke, good evening to you. Cold and dark. Well, I can see it's dark. I imagine it's cold. Is this a reflection of the mood of local people? How have local businesses responded to the challenges that Brexit is going to present?
Yeah, it's a huge challenge economically for this region, particularly because the ties between Calais and the United Kingdom are very deep and very close, both economical and historical. In fact, in town, there's a statue of Charles de Gaulle and Winston Churchill walking together, really demonstrating the close relationship between Calais and the United Kingdom. 2020 has, of course, had the dismal picture of COVID affecting the economy, and adding to that now the picture of Brexit too, having a very negative impact on the local economy. We already know that COVID, for example, has had a major impact on ferry crossings. They're falling from, on average, 50 per day to fewer than 35 per day. The Channel Tunnel operator already announcing that it's not posting any profits for 2020. So it's in that context that Brexit is arriving in this region. So as you can imagine, they're extremely worried about the potential economic fallout of Brexit here. The local economy is very dependent on tourism, dependent particularly on British tourists, the famous day trippers coming over for short stays and filling up the cafes and restaurants. The hospitality sector here extremely concerned that those tourists will be put off by those added passport controls that Catherine was talking about, and they just won't, quite simply, they won't come over the channel. Another key sector in the region is the fishing sector that employs 6,500 people here and along the coast at Boulogne. The Brexit deal, as we know it, does appear to have quite a lot of concessions for the European and French fishing sector, allowing them access to UK waters, but that doesn't really give them much visibility beyond the next 5 years. There is still quite a deal of concern there, despite the concessions, despite the slightly positive aspects there. Those then are perhaps the negative economic aspects. There are some positive aspects from Brexit here in the north of France. There are some opportunities to be seized. We know the French authorities are hiring 700 customs officials, for example. Many of them are based in the region already or are bringing further jobs into the region. And one of the most eagerly awaited aspects is the return of duty-free here in Calais. Now, that ended back in 1999, so when you talk to the hospitality sector, the hotels and restaurants, they get really nostalgic about talking about the glory days of lots of British people coming over and stocking up on duty-free. So they're hoping that could potentially compensate for any of the losses from the other impacts of Brexit.
Luke Brown in Calais, thank you very much indeed for that slice of what may be to come for the people of Calais there behind you. Luke Brown. The Brexit deal then, a document of over 1,000 pages. We've been picking through it to flag up some of the interesting points that might slip through the net. Luke Schrago has this.
It is fair, it is a balanced deal, and it is the right and responsible thing to do for both sides.
A balanced deal, and one that's going to see paperwork go through the roof both in Europe and the United Kingdom when it comes to trade. Mutual commerce is worth over 700 billion euros a year, and now customs will have to step into the middle of it, with both import and export forms needed. Quotas and customs duty, however, won't be applied, and British businesses will retain access to the European single market. Both sides also found agreement over fair competition.
We've taken back control of our laws and our destiny. We've taken back control of every jot and tittle of our regulation.
Boris Johnson ceded some ground on that score, agreeing to ensure UK firms don't unfairly undercut European competitors, and committed to EU lines on the environment, climate change, social rights and fiscal transparency. If either side fails in its obligations, customs tariffs can snap into place.
The European Union will support its European fishermen and women. It will accompany them. This is our commitment.
The fishing sector became one of the main stumbling blocks in the UK-EU divorce. Ultimately, the deal gives the continent's fishermen access to British waters until 2026, while progressively reducing European catches by 25%. Elsewhere, free movement also comes to an end, with police checks, tight borders and passports mandatory for travel to and from the UK from October 2021. Working in the UK will become harder too, with work visas granted on a points-based system, and then only if there's a formal job offer with a salary of at least €29,500. The UK has also pulled out of the international Erasmus exchange programme, meaning it'll now be far more complicated for foreign students to study in the UK and around twice as expensive.
Let's get more analysis of how people in Europe feel about the Brexit. The UK, of course, leaving the EU after 48 years. It is now official. Nick Spicer is our correspondent in Berlin, where the magazine Der Spiegel has been very critical of the Boris Johnson government and his advisers, saying that the Conservative Party lied to the British people over Brexit, and Britain has been, and this is a quote from Der Spiegel, Nick, I'm sure you've read this already, captured by gambling liars, frivolous clowns, and their paid cheerleaders. This is really strong stuff. Der Spiegel criticising the role played by much of the UK media too, calling it, quote, complicit, constantly trampling on fairness and the facts. That's quite a thing to say. Nick, let's bring you in now, sir. How much are people there talking about Brexit?
Not much. The German Chancellor Angela Merkel talked to the nation in her annual New Year's address at around 8 p.m. local time, and she just talked about COVID and the drama that the country had gone through last year and how she hoped things would be better next year. People aren't really talking about it a huge amount because of the pandemic. When you talk to German diplomats, their priorities are really China, Russia, dealing with the pandemic, which has international consequences. Brexit is somewhere down around 4 or 5. Angela Merkel was afraid of fireworks, if you will, that the kind you're hearing, not the kind you're hearing behind me, but diplomatic and economics ones, when Germany took on the presidency of the European Union. And she was the leader, if you will, of Europe, in charge of making sure that the Commission negotiated successfully with the United Kingdom. She was afraid of Germany being at the helm and a Brexit deal not actually occurring. And so I think she's breathed a sigh of relief, but there is a lot of disappointment. That's the first thing she said after the Brexit vote, that she's disappointed to see that this has happened. In actual concrete terms, sorry if this is very loud, I hope you can still hear me, but
we can hear you, sir. We can hear you.
Germans are satisfied that Europe stuck together throughout. Okay, thanks for telling me. That Europe stuck together, that was Angela Merkel's main goal, and I think that was the Commission's main goal for 4.5 years, that Britain not be able to pick off European Union members and set them one against another. And the automotive industry here was really, really concerned and is still concerned by Brexit, because there are 600,000 cars and vehicles sold to the UK every year from Germany. It's the biggest export market in the European Union, and some of the British negotiators knew that. They tried to leverage it, but they stood firm. And the industry federation here said it's good we have a deal. It's better to have a deal than no deal at all. Nobody wavered, and I think Angela Merkel, she's certainly not gloating. She wouldn't allow herself to do that. It's not in her character, and it's not tactically or strategically correct for her to say, oh, we won. She's being really quiet on Brexit, but I think, the overall feeling here is one that it's time to move on. To remain friends, but to get things back on a working relationship. But business doesn't know really what all of this will mean in the future. There's a lot of uncertainty about how to invest and how to move forward economically.
So, Nick, what's next for Germany in an EU without the UK?
I think, historically, we all know of the Franco-German motor of Europe. When these two countries, France and Germany, get together, they drive the union forward. It's historically been that way. And then you had the admission of the United Kingdom, which was sort of the voice of reason, if you will, in certain ways. They pushed for the single market. They made that happen. Sometimes the Germans would look to the United Kingdom when they thought, the French were having ideas that were maybe a little too abstract or a little too federalist or a little too, if you will, adventurous on the international scene. And they were happy to have the Brits come along and help them in some ways. So it will be a situation where the Germans won't be able to have the Brits as their allies in certain situations. They really relied on the Anglo-Saxon empiricism to go through these, dreams and plans and schemes for future institutions and so on. And so that will be gone. I think, the real concern is how to rebuild a relationship with the European Union, and it's now going to be strictly financial as far as Germany is concerned. How to have the investor confidence necessary without the European Court of Justice adjudicating disputes. There's going to be some kind of new mechanism. We don't really know what it is, so we're going to reinvent some kind of arbitration thing if there's a dispute about state subsidies. It's difficult, and if you just look at the trade relationship between the United Kingdom and Germany, it used to be Germany's 5th biggest export partner on the eve of Brexit, and now it's 8th. Since COVID started, exports dropped 30%, with the rest of the EU 15%. Things are not looking good. There's a relationship that needs to be rebuilt. I think the overall feeling here is one of disappointment, a willingness to move forward, a willingness to sort of say, well, the door is always open, but fully recognizing that the Brits are not going to come back anytime soon. And also an awareness that, Europe has to move forward despite this unhappy turn of events as Germany sees it.
Nick Spicer and the fireworks in Berlin. Thank you very much indeed, sir, and a happy new year to you. Nick Spicer there, a correspondent there in Berlin. Thank you.
And to you and our viewers.
Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you very much indeed. Now, Emmanuel Macron has spoken to the French people, the French president's traditional end-of-year address, in which he paid tribute to those who've made sacrifices this year. Their actions have saved lives during this pandemic, he said. Macron also spoke about Brexit. The UK, of course, has now left the EU. Macron stated that the future of France is first and foremost in Europe, and that the stimulus plan of €1 trillion is going to help create a better 2021 with jobs and opportunities across the EU 27. Here at France 24, Maria Sofas has this.
With the French government under fire for the slow rollout of its COVID-19 vaccination programme, President Emmanuel Macron used his traditional New Year's address to promise that there would be no unnecessary delays in providing inoculations.
Je ne laisserai personne jouer avec la sûreté et les bonnes conditions, encadrées par nos scientifiques et nos médecins, dans lesquelles la vaccination doit se faire. Et je ne laisserai pas davantage, pour de mauvaises raisons, une lenteur injustifiée s'installer. Chaque Français qui le souhaite doit pouvoir se faire vacciner de manière sûre et dans le bon ordre, en commençant par ceux qui présentent le plus de risques.
On Sunday, France joined several other EU countries in launching the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. Since then, fewer than 200 people have been vaccinated in France compared to 78,000 people in Germany. It's raising questions over the French government's cautious approach to vaccinating a largely sceptical population, with just 40% of French people wanting to receive the jab. Some are wary of past health scandals in France in recent decades, including those involving mismanaged vaccines. Some also fear that the coronavirus vaccines were developed too quickly, are aimed at bringing profit to big pharmaceutical companies, or risk long-term side effects that will only be discovered years from now. Shortly before Emmanuel Macron's speech on Thursday, Health Minister Olivier Véran announced plans to expand France's vaccination programme, which so far has solely targeted care home residents and health workers aged over 65. Véran said that from Monday, health workers aged over 50 could also get the jab, much sooner than initially planned.
Indeed, there's been much criticism about the perceived slowness of that vaccine rollout here in France. And we'll be keeping across all developments on that story. Let's now show you how some of the world has been saying farewell to 2020. Let's give you the scenes a few hours ago in Dubai, where the fireworks were certainly going off. This, of course, the iconic largest building on Earth, the famous Burj Khalifa Tower. And people there, socially distanced, who are allowed in to see it. Yes, a beautiful sight, but very few people able to actually be there and see it firsthand. So we're glad we can bring that to you and show you. Meanwhile, in Paris, of course, under lockdown from 8 p.m. till 6 a.m., including this New Year's Eve, so no big party in the streets of Paris. However, this is Notre Dame, where the composer Jean-Michel Jarre performed a concert and a light show at the famous cathedral, which, of course, is under reconstruction after the fire which gutted the rear of the cathedral. We will leave you with these celebratory pictures from Notre Dame and the musician-composer Jean-Michel Jarre. Happy New Year to you, and do stay with us on France 24.